In December 1937, in the shipyards of Hamburg, a ship was born that would carry a secret the world kept silent for 80 years. You know the Titanic. Everyone knows the Titanic. 1,517 people dead. The most famous maritime disaster in human history. Movies were made about it. Museums were built for it. Songs were written about it. More than 100 years later, the name alone still stops people in their tracks. But here is a question nobody ever asks. What if there was a ship that sank in the same cold, dark, merciless water and killed not 1,517 people, not twice that, not even 3 times that, but more than 6 times that number? Nearly 9,400 human beings, women, children, babies, wounded soldiers, nurses, refugees, all of them gone in a single night, in just over an hour. And you have never heard of it. Not because it didn't happen, it happened. Every detail is documented. Every name is recorded. Every minute of that night survives in testimony, archives, and cold, brutal fact. You have never heard of it because the world looked at 9,400 dead human beings and made a quiet, deliberate decision that these particular dead did not deserve to be remembered. This is the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff. And this is the story of why the world forgot. She was not a warship. She was never built for battle, hardship, or death. She was built for something far more powerful than any of that. She was built for a dream. Before 1937, a cruise ship was only for the rich, the aristocrats, the bankers, the industrialists who had always owned the ocean. An ordinary German worker, no matter how hard they worked or how long they saved, would never stand on the deck of an ocean liner and watch the sun set over open water. That world was not for them. The Wilhelm Gustloff changed that. 208 meters long, nearly 25,000 tons, capable of carrying 1,465 passengers in a single class. Number first class, no second class, no steerage. Everyone equal, everyone comfortable, everyone with access to the same dining rooms, the same swimming pool, the same promenade decks with the same endless view of the sea. She made her maiden voyage in March 1938. Over the next year, she carried tens of thousands of German workers on cruises to Norway, to Madeira, to the Mediterranean. For many of them, it was the first time in their lives they had ever seen the ocean. For many, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever experienced. And then the war came. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Wilhelm Gustloff was converted. Her beautiful white hull was painted gray. Red crosses were painted on her sides. She was anchored in the occupied Polish port the Nazis renamed Gotenhafen, where she sat for 5 long years as a floating barracks and training facility for German submarine crews. For 5 years she waited, gray and still, while the world burned around her. By January 1945, the war was effectively over. The Soviet Red Army had been advancing west for over a year, pushing through the ruins of East Prussia, and the civilians there were terrified. They had heard the stories, everyone had, of what the Soviet soldiers did to German civilians in the towns and villages they captured. Whether those stories were true, exaggerated, or fueled by Nazi propaganda didn't matter in January 1945. What mattered was that millions of people believed them, and they ran. It was called Operation Hannibal, one of the largest evacuations in human history. Hundreds of thousands of German civilians and wounded soldiers tried to flee west across the frozen Baltic Sea by any ship, barge, or fishing boat that would float. The conditions were apocalyptic. -20 degrees Celsius, roads choked with refugees, women pushing prams through the snow, children walking until they could walk no more, and simply lying down to die. Into this chaos came the Wilhelm Gustloff. On January 25, 1945, the order was given. The ship was to be loaded with refugees and evacuated west. She was designed to carry 1,465 passengers comfortably. What happened next was anything but comfortable. The refugees came in their thousands. They came with nothing but a suitcase, a photograph, or a child. The loading lasted 4 days. By the evening of January 30th, 1945, the Wilhelm Gustloff was carrying, by the most conservative estimates, 10,582 people. 10,582 human beings on a ship built for 1,500. The corridors were packed. The dining rooms were packed. The drained swimming pool was filled with wounded soldiers lying on stretchers. Women gave birth in stairwells. Children slept in lifeboats. At 12:30 in the afternoon on January 30th, 1945, exactly 12 years to the day after Adolf Hitler came to power, the Wilhelm Gustloff left the port of Gotenhafen. She would never arrive. Approximately 25 kilometers off the Pomeranian coast, in the dark, freezing waters of the Baltic Sea, a Soviet submarine was waiting. She was S-13. Her commander was a 31-year-old officer named Alexander Marinesco, a brilliant but reckless man who desperately needed a victory. At 9:16 in the evening, he gave the order. S-13 fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 hit. The first struck the bow. The second hit the drained swimming pool where hundreds of wounded soldiers lay. The third struck the engine room. The lights went out instantly. In absolute darkness, 10,000 people understood at the same moment that they were going to die. The water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. A human being in that water without protection would lose consciousness in about 5 minutes and be dead in less than 30. There were not enough lifeboats. Many were frozen solid to the ship and could not be launched. Others capsized immediately under the weight of desperate people. The ship listed heavily to port. The angle became so severe that lifeboats on the starboard side could not be reached. People jumped, they died within minutes. People crowded the decks and were washed away by the waves. They died within minutes. People trapped below in the crowded corridors drowned as the ship went under. Exactly 1 hour and 10 minutes after the torpedoes struck, at approximately 10:26 in the evening, the Wilhelm Gustloff sank beneath the surface of the Baltic Sea. Of the 10,582 people aboard, only about 1,252 survived. Nearly 9,400 people died in just over an hour, in water so cold that most never had time to be afraid. And then something almost as terrible as the sinking itself happened. The world said nothing. In the decades that followed, this tragedy was almost completely erased from history because the victims were German. And after the horrors of the Nazi regime, after the Holocaust, after everything Germany had done to Europe, there was very little appetite left in the world for German suffering. They were on the wrong side of history, and so they were forgotten. Their names are recorded, their stories exist. The wreck still lies 44 meters below the surface of the Baltic Sea, a silent grave for nearly 9,400 souls. History does not forget by accident. History forgets by choice. Every person on that ship had a name. Every person had a life, a family, and a future they believed in enough to run toward it through snow, bombs, and freezing hell. Their story deserves to be told, and now you know it. If this story moved you, if you believe that forgotten lives deserve to be remembered, then subscribe to Remnants. Every week we bring you the stories that history chose to forget. The people, the events, the moments that were buried, not because they didn't matter, but because it was easier to look away. Do not look away. Subscribe and help us make sure these stories are never forgotten again.